Great. Welcome. I'm Julia Gelman. I'm the Sustainability Specialist at the University Neighborhoods Association. Welcome to our second sustainability session, Lunch and Learn, all about different sustainability topics. Today, we're focusing on recycling, compost, and waste, and we have Daniel Rotman joining us, who has actually just completed a public waste audit for the UNA, so is very up to date on our behaviors and statistics, and is a consultant in waste management and behavior change. And from this session and the others, I hope you can engage with your neighbors, have a conversation about what you've learned and things that you're doing in your own household or neighborhood to be more sustainable. And so with that, I will hand it over to Daniel.
Okay, thank you so much, Julia. As Julia mentioned, my name is Daniel. I'm a waste reduction and prevention consultant, and I do a lot of work in the arena of waste management, but I'm also an expert in behavior change, and I have a really deep passion for recycling and waste prevention and reduction. So, we're going to talk about kind of some broad, big picture stuff today. But that's just to get you guys curious and asking questions. And then we can have a conversation about some of the details and things that I might have not created slides about. So just from the very beginning, if you wanted to, if you do have a question at any point, and if it's something that you don't see in the slides or the presentation, it doesn't mean that we can't talk about it. By all means, either you can include it in the chat or simply raise your hand and we can call you as well. And just to give everybody do a land acknowledgement as well, I am coming to you from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations in so-called Vancouver. And I know that land acknowledgement changes a little bit for UBC. So if there is somebody, Julia, if you'd like to do a land acknowledgement for UBC, if there's anybody attending from outside of that area that would also like to do a land acknowledgement, you can include it in the chat or also raise your hand. And then we can call on you to do a land acknowledgement for where you are as well. So I don't know, Julia, did you want to do one for UBC as well?
Sure, that'd be great. UBC is on the unceded ancestral territory of the Musqueam people. Thank you for that.
Awesome. And if there's anybody else that would like to do one for where they live, if they are not on UBC right now, feel free to raise your hand or include it in the chat. Looks like we are all good there. So what I'm going to do is actually, so I've got a short presentation, but since there's a small enough group, I'm going to kind of do a little bit more on camera before I switch over to the slides. And so I was hoping, that some folks maybe want to come on camera, and then also I'll invite you guys if you want to do a short introduction. And just the introduction can just be simply your name, what you're hoping to get out of the session today, and then also if you wanted to share a little bit about where you are in your waste reduction or zero waste journey in terms of things that you're learning and things that you'd like to learn, that's an opportunity to do that as well. And so I'll go first. My name is Daniel. I'm attending the session today because I really am passionate about waste reduction and prevention. I love sharing what I know with communities so that they can share it with share the information with their own communities, because that's actually what creates effective behavior change. It happens person to person through communities, not as much through large presentations or like pamphlets and flyers and stuff like that. It's really about who we talk to on a daily basis in our trust networks. And then where I am in my zero waste journey, I definitely know a lot about waste management and prevention, but the journey of becoming a person who generates less waste is always ongoing. And for me, it's a matter of right now and back in my situation, I am kind of getting back used to using my reusable containers and things again because of all the rules and everything that changed during COVID. But now we're back and we're not allowed to use plastic bags anymore, and you get reminders to bring your own bags everywhere, and I'm remembering to bring my own containers to restaurants and takeout places so I can be zero waste. That's where I am in my journey, just kind of getting back into the swing of things. And so We've got a few participants here that we can do some introductions of. I know not all of you might want to do introductions, and that's totally okay. So for those that would like to do introductions, you can feel free to jump on camera or simply unmute yourself or raise your hand. Then I'll call on you and you can share a little bit about yourself and what you'd like to get out of today's session, including any burning questions, and then where you are in your journey. We'll give a moment there. If anybody wants to give an introduction, please feel free to unmute yourself or come on camera now.
Looks like we've got Jenny.
Yes, I live on the northwest. Is it northwest? Yeah, northwest corner of campus at Chancellor Place, and we've been in this for a long time. I mean, zero waste, recycling and reducing and everything. So what now at shopping where they are not using plastic bag, which is terrific, I'm still wondering, ultimately, how are we going to dispose garbage without plastic bags? That is like impossible. I don't know how we could ever dispose of our household garbage without plastic bag. I can go shop with my own bag. I can do everything now. I can save my food in the fridge with, you know, the old-fashioned Corningware, glassware, whatever, but you know, without using plastic bags or plastic wraps. But I don't know how we could ever dispose garbage with that. That's a major thing. And then I have another question, but maybe save it for after everybody had maybe later on in your presentation. Yeah, thank you.
Can feel free to what you could do, Jenny, is just I'm going to make a note of what you mentioned, and then I'll address it maybe later on in the presentation at a point it makes sense. So if you do have that other question, you can ask it now. And
okay, I'll ask it now then. I'm just wondering if you're open to coming to Stratas on campus to make a presentation, because I mean, it's not possible for me to talk to all the neighbors. And I think a presentation would be good because people are so confused. Even with the compost, people throwing their compost with a plastic bag, and I thought, oh, I don't know, you know, I don't know. So someone's got to give, like, you know, the rationale, the ultimate goal, and so maybe people can make sense of what to do with the different containers in the garbage disposal in the garbage room. Are you open to coming to Strata to make presentations?
Okay. Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. I do presentations like that all the time, and you know, I do also work with a committee that deals specifically with multifamily unit issues, and a lot of people there are also on Stratas trying to do what you're doing. So yeah, so I'll talk about that actually at the end. Yeah,
Thanks.
sort of ways to get involved. That yeah. Okay, excellent.
Great.
Thank you so much. Anybody else would like to introduce themselves and talk about their journey? Go ahead.
Hi. Hi, I'm Amer. Just before I continue, I wanted to add a bit on Jenny. She, in terms of asking you to come to make like presentations for Strata, probably if it's also a good idea to add posters. Like I know, like in the garbage rooms, there are some posters, and some people are abiding by those, but probably posters are not comprehensive. So in terms of having posters, not written posters, but more like a graphical ones, it would help as well. If you guys have such things, it would be a good idea to circulate to all the strata management of the area. Now to talk about myself, I'm Amer. Why I wanted to join this conversation is just continuous learning for myself, for get off on the updates of how things are getting more recycled, rather I mean in terms of all the updates. and just as a continuous learning for that. And where I am in waste, and my waste journey, just on a personal level, trying to like probably everyone else would be able to do that, just bringing my own bags and trying to not have anything like in terms of food to be thrown away. I know it would be composted, but like have eat a limited amounts, as in not having excess waste, and you know, try to be conservative on all of that. Probably as a brief idea of where I am at. And I come also from, I'm living at UBC campus as well. So yeah, thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Amber.
I think
Like
Carol.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi, my name is Carol. I'm living at Georgia Point, and I've lived in a lot of different places, and I've learned that every place has got their own method of recycling, what they recycle, what they don't. And of course, so my first thing is to try and learn what is the rules at the new place. The other thing is also, one thing I find is a lot of people, even who've been at a place for a long time, don't follow the rules. And it's like, how do you change that, or do you just sort of live with it and accept that not everybody's going to do everything?
Yes, actually, thank you so much for that, Carol. Some good notes there on behavior change. And I think that we can definitely going to bring that up towards the end of the presentation in sort of a more general conversation area. And also for Amber, we'll talk a little bit about like posters and the difference between kind of like education and information and behavior change. We'll do that a little bit after the kind of main content that I'll try and get through.
Okay, thank you.
For the feedback. Yeah, Carol. Yeah, great. Anybody else would like to do a quick introduction before we get into the main content, the slides, and there'll be lots of time for questions and things afterwards as well. So if you don't get a chance now, you'll be able to ask questions again later as well.
Hi, I'm Jenny. I'm a Westbrook Village resident. I am and have been kind of trying to reduce the amount of waste that our family uses. I'm trying to not buy plastic. I'm going down to not buying liquid forms of washing powders and dishwasher powders and things like that. So trying to get reduce that plastic and transport of water-based products. I try to recycle and I get really confused. What can you put in? What can't you? What's stretchy plastic? What's not? You know, what's the best thing to be using? I did see at the Nest on in UBC a really great thing above their recycling bins, which actually had real samples of what people should be putting in those things, because even just reading doesn't, and having a picture wasn't as helpful as seeing that. So I'm wondering if that sort of thing is what we can use and can help our fellow residents to recycle well. Because like I say, I am a conscious recycler and I get confused. So thank you for holding this workshop.
Excellent. Okay, that's wonderful. Yeah, thanks, Jenny. I can definitely talk about that. It's always amazing. I do a lot of these kinds of presentations, and just as sort of an overall note, like I always kind of create the presentation with just like kind of serving basic information in mind, and then if I ask people questions about what they want to learn, they end up asking about stuff that's like really advanced material, and I love it because it means that we can race through the basic stuff and get to the exciting, juicy stuff. So, all right, any other last minute or last introductions, questions, things like that that people would like to share before we get started?
We just had one in the chat from Rose who wants to
yes.
know more about what we can do in our daily life.
Okay, Rose, what we'll do in our daily life. Okay, we will get into that. Okay, so what I'll do now is I'm going to share my screen and we will jump into a quick presentation to give you guys a little bit about kind of like the almost like the Coles notes of our system, and that will maybe give you guys a bit of context into understanding maybe where the complexity in the system comes from and why it's so difficult to work with, and some of the interesting things about UBC as well. So I'll share my screen now. One second, everybody. Just, of course, push the wrong button. Okay, so I think everybody should see my screen now, and we just did introductions. Let me know if you can't see my screen. I'm gonna make sure I get the chat up here as well so I can take a look at what's going on there. Okay, so the first thing I want to share with you guys is the zero waste hierarchy. And this is sort of a, why I choose to do the introduction here is because there's kind of two main strategies when it comes to waste reduction or waste. And one is waste management and one is waste reduction and prevention. And my focus is on waste reduction and prevention because for me, that's the important thing. And some people will make the analogy of, you know, if the bathtub is overflowing, should we be removing water from the bathtub, or should we be turning off the tap? And waste reduction and prevention, the activities that are listed in that first top box there when it comes to rethinking and redesigning, reducing and reusing, those are the waste reduction and prevention strategies and activities that we can do. Whereas things like recycling and composting, material recovery, residuals management, all these kind of like fancy names for landfilling or burning our garbage, those are all management things. And the reason why they're management versus reduction and prevention is because the waste has already been created by that point. And we're simply trying to figure out what's the best way to deal with this material once it's been created, as opposed to thinking about, well, how do we get rid of it in the first place and maybe design it out of our system, or think about a different way of doing things. And quite often, reducing things sometimes just means saying no to certain kinds of behaviors or things that we do in our daily lives, our habits, and trying to think of a different way to do them. But that's not always possible because of the way that our system is designed. And there are many reasons for that. So let's just move on from there and just try and keep it in mind that a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about, at least in the beginning part of this presentation, is just about waste management. And then afterwards, a lot of you were really talking about, well, how do I reduce and prevent my waste? And so we'll come to that at the end of the presentation and have more of a conversation around reducing and reusing and how we can, say, for example, avoid using, avoid using plastic bags to throw away our garbage. So the basic terms that I find being used today to describe garbage and recycling and waste management, there are so many terms being used, and that's often sometimes a source of confusion. And so this kind of like this way of presenting the terminology is this kind of like detached boxes, and what goes into these boxes is kind of how I see things being discussed on an everyday basis. And we talk about waste in the Metro Vancouver or City of Vancouver. They talk about waste, and they generally talk about waste as it refers to garbage and trash and what we send to the landfill or what we send to the incinerator. And waste is often contrasted with recycling, which is the stuff that we send to different locations, not necessarily the landfill or the incinerator, with the hope of using that material again. And quite often, the kinds of two basic categories that we talk about there are containers, which are plastic, metal, and glass containers. And quite often, we're talking about those kinds of containers which are used to hold our food and things that we buy from the grocery store. And then we have this other section called compost or organics or green bin. And this is generally the kind of category that is used for anything that we can dispose of and treat through biological processes, through composting and biodegradation and stuff like that. And we'll talk about the difference between compost and biodegradability in a little bit. And then the last kind of category there, which is quite often referred to separately altogether, even though it's a form of recycling, is kind of the stuff that we have to take to depots. And depots, you know, sometimes we take our plastic bags there, we take our returnable containers there, the stuff that gets charged a deposit onto, or we take maybe our textiles or electronics there. And UNA has one such depot, and it's Westbrook Community Center, where you can bring a whole bunch of different kinds of materials that are not typically accepted in your curbside recycling program, or in, you know, your basic blue bin, or your, you know, or the black bin, or the green bin for garbage. And this is the way that I see things being spoken about. However, for me, it looks like this, where waste is all of this broad category. It's just anything that we don't want anymore. And this is more of like a dictionary definition of waste. And underneath the category of waste are a whole bunch of different ways in which we get rid of waste. And so we get rid of waste in the garbage, and we call that trash, or we call that landfill. But recycling is also a form of waste. And all of the things, the different categories of materials or products or functions that we find in recycling generally fall along the lines that we are familiar with. So things like the containers, which I mentioned before, are plastic, metal, or glass. Then sometimes we have a category specifically for paper or cardboard, and then we have that bin for organics, and then we have depot. But all of that is recycling. And so when I say waste, I really mean everything. And when I say recycling, I'm talking about all of the things that we can generally divert away from the garbage or the trash or the landfill. And this term diversion is going to come up again during our presentation, because it's quite often how organizations will quantify their performance, which is in the ratio of, well, of how much we're generating, how much do we send to garbage versus how much do we send to recycling. And so that will come up again in a little bit. So this is another way to look at waste, because before, all we've been talking about are things that we throw away. And that tends to fall in that first category of material on the the left-hand side of your screen, called materials. However, we can waste more than just physical materials. We can waste energy. For example, leaving your lights at home when you go, when you leave for work, or you know, for example, using a non-programmable thermostat, which tends to run heat or cool in your living space when you're not there. So that's a waste of energy. We can think about a waste of nutrients. Now, this we kind of spoke about it before. Somebody was saying, well, how do I reduce my, you know, my food waste? I believe that was Amber. And so we can think about, well, we can compost the food and the organics that we don't throw away, but is that still a waste? Could that food have been eaten? Could those nutrients have been better used in somebody else's body rather than putting it through a compost process? Now, we can also waste time, and we can also talk about the impacts on our time as it relates to waste management. So I like to say that you know, when it comes to time management, if we're constantly going out to shop for things like single-use items or things that we buy on a regular basis, then we could be said to waste our time, versus buying something that will last us much longer, or is something that is repairable, or something that we can, for example, maybe use one of these new kinds of services that actually helps us get our stuff faster without us needing to leave the house. And you can imagine, say, for example, 100 people going to the grocery store and driving their cars to the grocery store, they're all spending that time driving to the grocery store. Whereas if you've got a delivery service, that grocery store is essentially coming to you. And there's going to be a lot less time spent delivering those materials to you and to folks in your neighborhood than to send an individual car from every household to the grocery store and back. And then lastly, all of the materials, the energy, the nutrients, the time, those all have a money factor. And so when it comes down to you know, reasons to try and reduce waste, these are all different reasons too, right? So some people might not want to waste money. Some people might not want to waste time. Some people simply just don't want to waste resources that come in the form of, you know, nutrients or energy or materials. And so while there is a strong environmental motivation to reduce or prevent your waste, there are many other motivations as well to reduce and prevent waste. And they can fall under any one of these categories here. And the reason I just mention all of this is because we get stuck a little bit thinking about that the only way that we can reduce waste is by thinking about, well, buying things differently or trying to, use less plastic. But there are many, many more ways that we can reduce waste that will have a positive impact on our lives. So now that we spoke about the terminology and the different categories of waste that we have, I want to show you guys an infrastructure map. And the reason I want to show you this infrastructure map is to kind of give you a sense of how big our recycling system is. So hold on 1 second. I just need to change the, there we go. So that screen share, is that screen share still working? I feel like it's maybe not.
Yep, I can see the map.
Oh, you got the map. Okay, great, thanks. This is a map of Metro Vancouver, and University Endowment Lands is over here to our left. And when we zoom out, we can see all of the municipalities in Metro Vancouver. And all the little black dots that you're looking at are infrastructure points related to garbage. So that generally is made up of a couple or two different types of facilities or three different types of facilities. And the first ones are transfer stations, which you can see there's kind of one in every municipality, Surrey all the way down to Langley here. And then we have our incinerator and our landfill. However, there's also one landfill that Metro Vancouver was using a little while ago and all the way up at Cache Creek. And so we don't actually use that landfill anymore. That landfill is full as of a couple of years ago. But this is where Metro Vancouver used to send its garbage, way up there. And so anyway, coming back to Metro Vancouver and drawing a little bit of a distinction between Metro Vancouver and what happens throughout all of Metro Vancouver and what happens in Vancouver is a little bit different, because the policies that might be specific to Vancouver might be a little different or complementary to the policies that exist in Metro Vancouver. However, UBC is a special case. UBC is called University Endowment Lands, and that's not actually a part of the city of Vancouver, but it is actually a part of Metro Vancouver. So while a lot of us live close to Vancouver and might hear a lot about the marketing and terminology and rules related to what happens in Vancouver, at UBC, they're going to be a little bit different. And one of the folks who introduced themselves did mention that every municipality, that was Carol, mentioned that everywhere she goes, the recycling rules are a little bit different. And that's because there's a different jurisdiction responsible for that duty of caring for waste. And some in the past, that's actually something that's changing all the time. So in the past, it used to be our municipalities that took care of all of our garbage, all of our recycling, all of our organics, but now that's different. Some of it is managed by our municipality. Some of it is managed by provincial stewardship programs. So that's Recycle BC, and that's not connected to our municipality. It is a private organization. And then sometimes services are managed by Metro Vancouver. So there are a lot of different organizations that can be responsible for waste management, and that quite often impacts what our system looks like and where the rules go. And we're kind of moving on a way towards harmonization, but that's a little bit away from the waste infrastructure map. But just to let you guys know that these are all the garbage facilities, all the black dots. And then we can look at all of the liquid waste, right? So that's a form of waste that we don't often talk about, that we kind of will talk about a little bit later on in the presentation as it relates to dog waste. But you can see here we have a lot of liquid waste processing facilities, these kind of like light blue dots scattered around by Stanley Park, by Iona Beach. And then now back to the materials, we have all of these blue dots that are slowly popping up are for all the different kinds of recycling. And you'll notice that these facilities are kind of outside of urban areas. They're kind of scattered around the Fraser River and these industrial commercial areas. And that's something that's actually really important, because the further away our recycling trucks need to go, the more expensive the service is, the more kind of a pain in the butt it is for municipalities and organizations to manage. And then the last set of facilities that I want to bring to your attention is all these little green dots. And these are the facilities that process our green waste or our compost or our green bins, such as like yard waste or food waste or things like that. And the reason why I want to show you this infrastructure map is because sometimes people will come with questions, well, where are things actually getting recycled and where does my recycling go? And these dots are where your recycling goes. Now, quite often, material before it gets recycled needs to be separated and put into homogeneous or consistent categories so that any one of these individual businesses who, for example, say Pacific Carpet Recycling, they're only interested in carpets. They're not interested in any other kind of waste. So in order for them to recycle stuff, they just need to receive carpets. Likewise, there are other facilities here like Urban Impact Recycling, which might deal with paper or plastic, but they don't actually recycle things there. They just kind of package things up to send off further down the chain in order for it to be recycled at a facility, say, for example, like Merlin Plastics, where they actually will, shred plastics, remelt them down into new pellets, and then sell those pellets for production of new plastic goods. And there are many, many different facilities like this. These are all, there's this drywall recycling. We've got Revolution Infrastructure. They're kind of a waste hauler. But the point is that if you ever think that recycling is not happening for whatever reason, and there's a ton of news articles and news stories out there about how recycling doesn't make it, recycling ends up in the garbage, that we're not actually recycling, that Canada only recycles 9% of its plastics, those numbers can be sometimes sensational and confusing. And I like to show this infrastructure map because these are the number of businesses that are involved in recycling our waste and dealing with our waste. And there are a lot of businesses involved, and most of them are for profit. None of them really operate on charity. There's no recycling, there's no recycling fairies out there that are magically doing anything for us. These are all businesses trying to make a go of it and be profitable. The other reason I like to show this map is that, we generally think about the complexity of our waste management system and forget that, one truck kind of has to go between point A and point B, and that most often trucks are designed specifically to carry one type of good. So coming from the Westboro place, our garbage might take this route. So this is just one truck that might do this. And so the garbage will leave UBC, it will go to this other facility called the Vancouver South Transfer Station, where it gets amalgamated, put onto bigger trucks. And it's either going to go to the Vancouver landfill, and sometimes it's going to go to the incinerator in Burnaby. And that's just for the garbage. Then we also have another truck that comes to pick up organics. And fancy enough for us, the landfill and the organics management facility are actually very close to each other. So they're going to take a similar route. But there's a second truck going down to that same area as the landfill, but just for a different material. And then we look at, well, what happens for our containers? And so our containers will leave the endowment lands, will go to another facility here. It could be Merlin Plastics, or there might even be a drop-off point at another facility where, for example, all of the number 5 plastic gets sorted out from the number 3 plastic. You may have heard these numbers before for different kinds of plastic, but the different kinds of plastic need to be recycled together. They need to be recycled separately. Different kinds of plastic can't be recycled together. So they sometimes need to go to a facility where they get separated and then sent further downstream for actual processing. And those are going to be different facilities that deal with our plastics than the ones that deal with our paper. So I have here another paper processing facility called Cascades Recovery that does a lot of paper recycling, and they are a separate facility that does that. And then last but not least, you might be wondering, well, where do our electronics go? And so our electronics might go to another facility called Happy Stands, which does a fair bit of electronics recycling, but they don't actually do the recycling themselves. They actually package things, send it off to another facility that does the recycling itself. So that is our waste infrastructure map. And I actually just want to take a quick break here and come back and see everybody, which, interestingly enough, hold on a second, something is, what happened? Hey, Julia, I'm assuming you can still see the map?
It's your screen now.
Just my screen now.
Oh, now I see the map.
So I've lost my Zoom controls.
I can
Can you
maybe.
unshare? Like I completely lost my Zoom control. That's never happened to me before.
I tried removing your host permissions. I don't know if that might not solve it.
Whoa. Sorry, everybody, there's a little bit of a technical glitch here. I'm wondering if I should rejoin Julia because I can't stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, we could try. Oh no, you're still doing it. I stopped your video, but that didn't seem to do anything.
Yeah,
I
weird.
could put you in the waiting room. That might solve it.
Yeah, try. See if you can boot me out.
Hi. So I kicked out Daniel, and we'll see if he joins us again in the waiting room. All right. Well, that was a good start. I didn't know about all the different types of waste that the Metro Vancouver region accepted. I don't know about you all, if anyone was surprised or learned anything new that they didn't yet know. And thinking about all the distances that things travel too. I mean, it's nice that there's so many local options for where waste can go. That was a pleasant surprise for me.
It's always nice to know how much effort there is happening behind the scenes for recycling to happen, but it might not be happening the way that we think. So I just wanted to pause for a second there to see if there were any questions about what I've spoken about so far before I move on. Okay. Yes, that's true. I didn't know there were so many places for stuff to go. They go to a lot of different places. And I think that all of us grow up thinking that recycling maybe happens in one place and it happens by these amazing people that really want our materials to go somewhere else. But the reality is that all of these are private businesses trying to make a go of it. And the reality for them is that if they can't move 90% or more of the material that they're receiving, then chances are they're not going to be in business for very long. So most of the recycling facilities, they will have this kind of a threshold where about 5 to 10% is usually where they really want to keep things below that, because then they're wasting, right? They're wasting waste, which is kind of thing. They're wasting the resources that it takes to move that materials through the system. They're wasting money in terms of upgrading or making that equipment work and having their employees sort through waste. Recycling facilities really want to do a good job of sorting the materials, and they really need us to do a good job of sorting the materials in order for that system to work, because otherwise they can't make a profit, the business won't be successful, and recycling doesn't happen. And so a really quick way of summarizing that, I think I'm not a host anymore, Julia. Go ahead, Amber, you got a question?
You did touch base on the numbers that we were seeing on the news or whatever, that not all of the plastic or whatever waste has been like recycled. But you didn't actually, and you did show us the map of all of the management facilities. My question here is that, I know that it's probably more than 9%, but I would like to have more clarification from you about that, if possible, please.
Okay, so I'm gonna give you a really quick answer and continue the presentation, and then if we have time, we'll go into a deeper answer. So I kind of mentioned that there are different types of plastic, and so sometimes we look at the bottom of our plastic bottle. It'll have like a number 1 or a number 2 on there. Sometimes we'll look at the bottom of a food container from the grocery store. It'll have a number 5. All of those are different resins of plastic. And some of them, there's PET, HDPE, all these kind of technical acronyms for plastic, but they're different chemicals. And each different of those chemicals needs to go to a different facility in order for it to get recycled. However, there's a whole category of plastics that are not part of this category of recyclable plastics. And the difference there is a technical term, I won't go into it too much, but there's thermoplast and thermoset plastics. And thermoset plastics are like toys, things like that. Once that plastic was melted and reformed into its physical form, it can no longer be melted again and reformed. Only thermoplast plastics can do that, which is the kind of plastic that we get that our bottles and things are made out of. They can be remelted, reheated, and reformed into the kind of like basic building blocks of products that are made out of plastic. But that's a special kind of plastic, and not all plastics are like that. So a big reason why only 9% of plastics is recycled is because a whole bunch of that 9% is just plastics. It's like plastic toys, or those plastic packaging that we have a hard time breaking open plastic packaging that has no number on it. We don't even know what kind of plastic it is. There's just no way that stuff can ever get recycled. It's a non-starter. The other reason why only 9% of that material might get recycled is because of contamination, one reason. And then the other reason is markets, right? So plastic is made out of oil. And if the price of oil is cheap enough, then the price of recycled plastic becomes too high and cost prohibitive to those companies that are trying to make something out of that recycled plastic. So, yep.
Go ahead. Sorry, I wanted to ask, so, but the rest is getting recycled just elsewhere, not in Metro Vancouver,
No,
or it is
probably
not getting recycled at all?
It's probably not getting recycled at all. And in the worst case scenario, we're exporting plastics to be recycled, but the export facility is not capable of handling it, or there's too much contamination, and then it becomes disposal for them. But as soon as something is in Metro Vancouver, the way our system works is if it's recorded as not going to the landfill or the incinerator, then it's recorded as recycling. And beyond our borders, we have no way of controlling what actually happens to it, but it doesn't change the way that what we call it.
Thanks.
Yeah, so there are some problems there. Okay, so back to the presentation real quickly. I just want to show you guys these 2 slides. So this is how we used to do waste management in the past. It was everything going to a landfill. All of our garbage, all of our organics, all of our plastics. It was a very simple system. It was very easy for us to understand. It was really easy to manage. It was actually exceptionally cheap to run as well. But today we have something very different because we have all of these different waste streams. They all need their own transportation. They might need their own transfer facility. Then from that transfer facility, the transportation goes to a specific processing facility. And we all have different kinds of processing facilities for different kinds of materials. You can see here, there's a bunch of like compost piles for our organics. You might have this like incinerator or a special kind of processing facility for plastics. And then of course, we still are very much using landfills to dispose of a lot of our waste. And notice I'm using the term waste because sometimes our recycling goes there, sometimes our organics and sometimes our electronics go there anyway, regardless of what we try and do. And a lot of it has to do with what we put inside the bin and what else we put inside the bin. Because if we fill our electronics bin full of electronics, but then somebody dumps a can of beans on top of it, chances are that electronic waste might not end up at the right facility because of the contamination. So we're going to talk a little bit about some numbers. I'm going to show you guys some graphs, and all of this is to just give you a sense of what it actually means and how we talk about recycling kind of at this level. And so now I'm showing you information for all of Metro Vancouver. And Metro Vancouver generally advertises that we're very good at recycling, and they'll show you a graph like this. And so 64%, this is over 2 million tons. So that's like 2 billion kilograms of material. It is a lot of material by weight. Around 64% of it is diverted from our landfills and incinerators. And I mentioned that number before. Sometimes we only really care about this percentage of materials that leaving our what kind of disposal tactic are we using here? And we see 36% either goes to the landfill or waste to energy, and 64% gets diverted. But what does that actually mean? Because we're talking about waste for the entire region there. And so here's another graph of that whole amount, again, this time with a little bit less information, but you'll notice here there are 3 sectors. First is residential. It's called municipal solid waste sometimes. The second one is called commercial institutional, or sometimes referred to as IC&I. And then the last one is construction and demolition. So of this, something like 3.5 million tons of material, around 50% of it is construction and demolition. And then around 30% of it is residential. And around 20% of it is commercial and institutional. And so whenever somebody is talking about waste, and you're hearing it as a resident or as a citizen of a place, they're really only talking about this residential chunk, this 30% of it. That's all they're talking about. Because you are not the waste that we generate at home doesn't go to the same facilities. There are different rules, there are different regulations, different companies that deal with these different sectors of material. And UBC is a little special because there are commercial and institutional facilities on UBC as well as residential facilities. There's a ton of construction and demolition, but that's not part of the same system. The other thing that's interesting about UBC is that a lot of the buildings are multifamily buildings, and multifamily buildings are another kind of confusing thing because sometimes multifamily buildings are considered commercial and institutional. In the case of a strata, they're not considered residential because stratas are private businesses. Whereas mostly in Vancouver, you can still maybe live in a small apartment building or townhouse, and that sometimes will be considered residential. So a big portion of our recycling, or what we talk about as municipal solid waste, is actually institutional or commercial. And so when we look at recycling now by sector, we can see the real story. So construction and demolition, remember, was 50% of all of the waste being generated. 78% of that material gets recycled versus what happens inside of a multifamily residential building, which also exists at UBC. And look at that, 38% of that's getting recycled. So there's a big difference between what we're recycling as a region and then what we're recycling as an individual sector. Single family homes are doing quite well, but not nearly as well as multifamily residential buildings or even commercial institutional buildings. And sometimes you can see here stratas and multifamily buildings are sometimes performing at a very similar rate. And so now when we're looking at waste composition or what's inside of our garbage inside of multifamily buildings, why is that diversion rate so low? Well, you can see here, organics is divertible, that's 21%, plastics is divertible, and paper, right? So even between these, we're looking at almost 60% of what's inside of the garbage coming out of multifamily buildings is recyclable or divertible. But this is in the garbage, right? So we're looking at a huge amount of recycling still in the garbage. And there are many, many reasons why that happens. It's confusing. There are a lot of difficulties around managing waste within stratas and stratas in buildings. Sometimes the strata itself can be an impediment. Sometimes the service sectors that service these buildings don't provide the right kind of education and signage. And then also when people move around, the rules change and then people kind of just stop paying attention. So we get this kind of fatigue of trying to learn new recycling systems everywhere. And then there's one more kind of sector that we didn't really talk about, but the sector that I worked on with UBC, with UNA, which is streetscape composition. And sometimes that's included under residential or municipal solid waste. But if we look at the composition of what's in our garbage in buildings, you see we have a lot of organics, a lot of plastic, a lot of paper, and then there's kind of this mix of other stuff of electronics and hygiene materials, metals, non-compostable organics. But when we look at what we're throwing away on the street, it's actually a little bit simpler and a little bit different, right? Because mostly a big portion of what we dispose of on the street is dog waste. And some people will dispose of dog waste in their own toilets at home, so it becomes part of the liquid waste stream. But when we're walking our pets outside, we don't always have access to those kinds of facilities. So a lot of dog waste ends up in the bins on the streetscape. And you can see here, there's a lot less paper, there's a lot less containers, and there's a lot less organics. So what we throw out when we're on the street is very different than what we throw out at home. However, I'm showing you these two graphs and pointing out dog waste here because while it's over 50% of the material by weight, it's only about 1/4% of the material by volume. And now let's contrast that with containers, which was under 10% of the material by weight, but about 25% of the volume. And so in waste management, while we normally talk about material in terms of its weight, the volume is also important. And that's because a lot of recycling, especially when it comes to plastics, is called low weight, high volume. And so it takes a similar size truck to pick up the same volume of garbage as it does plastic, but it weighs sometimes 1/3 or 1/4 of that amount. And so the same cost to pick up that material, but you're talking about far less weight, and the operational impacts on that are great. So all of this is just to confuse you a little bit about how, why exactly our recycling system is so complicated, why it's different everywhere, the different trucks that service these materials, the different kinds of data that we collect on these things, they're all essentially different. And so that's the end kind of my formal screen share, how I wanted to talk about these things with you guys. But now I want to talk a little bit about the kind of behavior change aspect of these things and how it sort of ties into what we just spoke about. And so I'll go there. The question, I'll start it off actually between the question of recycling and upcycling. And so the major difference between recycling and upcycling has to do with the value of the end product. And so whereas recycling tries to maintain the value of the product being worked through the system, upcycling tries to increase it. So a big example would be taking my single-use water bottle and turning it back into a single-use water bottle. That would be the ideal version of recycling. But in fact, that really doesn't happen because of some issues around food and food safety when it comes to plastics. And how do we maintain food safety throughout the plastics supply chain? So that's a big thing there. So a lot of plastic actually ends up getting downcycled because we can't turn it into the same high value food carrying product. And so upcycling that plastic, for example, would be to take all of that plastic that we use in a water bottle, and then we're going to make it into, for example, like a piece of art. And say that piece of art is actually something that helps your neighbors reduce the use of single-use water bottles and helps them encourage to bring their own reusable water bottles. Now we're talking about upcycling because the value of that product, of that art piece, is so much more than it was before, just as a single-use water bottle. Okay, so now getting into some of the questions that we got from the beginning of the presentation. So yes, I do questions to stratas and buildings because they are a different sector and because they're a combination of public and private. They need sometimes a little bit of help because some of the material is collected by cities, some of it's collected by private companies, and then now how do we create a consistent recycling system there? So it requires additional communication, additional education, and people need to really be flexible to understand that the rules that exist where they live might not be the same as the rules that are where they work, and the rules might not be the same when they're throwing away waste on the street, than their own houses, than where they work, than where they go to school. So these are all those different systems. Posters and information, those can be helpful, but then again, we need to remember that they're very specific. And so a poster at your work or your office might have different information than the poster in your home, or some poster that you might see about what materials you can recycle in the street. It's kind of on us to learn these things, but at the same time, we have to give each other kind of compassion because of how many different systems there are. We talked about the different sectors, we talked about all the different companies on the infrastructure map. They all have their own rules, and we need to try and do our best to abide by those rules. And then to remember to be compassionate for ourselves when we forget the rules, or when the rules are too confusing because of how many different sets of rules there are. It's not something entirely in our control because of all of those different organizations that deal with waste. Okay, so here's the thing. When it comes to behavior change, we can give each other all the information about what materials are accepted where and where they go and who processes them. Those sometimes can influence our motivations to do these things, especially if we find out that what's happening may not be what we want, the less materials getting recycled than what we want. But the behavior change piece comes from practice and comes from essentially a recognition that in order for that recycling, we kind of treat it as an individual behavior, but in reality, it's actually a collectivist behavior, because our individual behavior might not make a big difference in this case of the 9%, but we can definitely contribute to that number getting lower by not participating. And so it's really important to participate, to try and follow the rules, because it takes all of us together to know the rules in order for the system to work effectively, and in order for those recycling businesses to do their jobs effectively. The more contamination we put into the bins, the worse it is for them, the less material ends up getting recycled. And so the general rule there is if you're not sure that it's something that can be recycled, you're better off putting it in the trash. because you might impact the way that that recycling is processed afterwards. Okay. The other thing I want to mention is that I will leave you my contact information, everybody. The other thing that I'd like to mention is that habits can get stuck. So we can be at one place for a certain period of time. We're going to learn the recycling system, but then if we move to a different facility, we need to relearn the recycling system, and that gets made more difficult because we get habits and we develop habits for recycling. And that's another reason why the whole system gets confusing, is because when we forget that recycling is a habit, that we learn to do it and that we kind of do it automatically afterwards, when we move into those new systems, we're going to bring our habits with us. And that sometimes doesn't help those new systems. And so when it comes to, say, for example, people wanting to reduce their plastic intake or to change the kinds of products that they buy, the number one thing that I try and encourage people is to do it with a friend, get somebody to remind you and to help you be compassionate about changing your behavior, because it takes a lot of practice. Think about learning a new instrument. You can't just pick up an instrument and play it right away. Same thing with a waste management system. You can't just pick it up and use it right away. It takes a little bit of learning. Sometimes it takes a little bit of unlearning of what we previously learned, and then always being in touch with our sources of education, such as Julia and UNA, to make sure that we develop new habits that are based on the rules of where we currently live. Okay, so I'm going to drop my contact information in the chat there, because I know we are running out of time now, and I want to make sure that there's a couple minutes of last minute questions for people that want it. Okay, any last minute questions? I'm happy to stay for a few extra minutes in case people need it, because talking about our recycling system in 1 hour is quite often not enough. I teach a course where we talk about this for 16 to 20 hours, so there's a lot more to talk about.
Maybe before the official end, I'll just share also in the chat. For those of you who don't know, we've started a sustainability champions network. So I know that Jenny had been suggesting, presentations and that kind of thing. And that's the kind of thing that we'd love for the sustainability champions to kind of volunteer at their own stratas and help with the sustainability education and just connecting with each other. So if you're interested in joining that, do send me an email. And we have our next sustainability session on April 7th on sustainable transportation. And we also did myself and somebody from Metro Vancouver did an engagement session with the electoral area A last month that they recorded, and the subject was plastics recycling. So I'm going to link the recording of that as well as the event registration for the next Lunch and Learn in the chat, and of course stay in touch if you have any questions. And thank you for joining us, everybody.
Yeah. And I'm gonna throw one more link into the chat, which is the not-for-profit organization that I volunteer with, where we have a monthly waste committee where we talk about these issues in detail, and people who are extremely passionate about it and have projects talk about those as well. And then we also, through that same link, there's information. If you contact us, we can get you in touch with a specific multi-unit residential building committee, which deals with waste. And like I mentioned before, these are all people who are trying to add recycling streams to their strata or multi-use residential building, or people that have worked with their strata organizations in order to change recycling systems, and how to do that specifically, because stratas are all different and they tend to be very political. But we have some people that are working in those areas and have a lot of resources and information to share, but hard to do in a short amount of time. So best to join one of those committees, get to know the people that are there, and that's one of the best ways to create behavior change, is simply by getting to know people and sharing information like that. Awesome. So if people have more questions, I'm ready to stick around.
And I, just before people leave, want to thank you, Daniel, for all your information and insight and passion. It was wonderful to learn from you. So thank you.
Excellent. My pleasure.
I will stop the recording too.